Good afternoon. My name is Avinom Pat. I'm the director of the Center for Judaic Studies and Contemporary Jewish Life here at the University of Connecticut. It's wonderful to welcome all of you here today for our first faculty-student colloquium of the 2021-2022 academic year. As you know, this program is being recorded. Our wonderful organizer of these series of colloquia for this year is our PhD student, Yosha Yelitsky, who's graduate assistant at the Center for Judaic Studies. So in a moment, I will turn the screen over to Yosha, who will introduce our speakers today. But thank you so much for being here with us today. And I'm really looking forward to learning from Joan and Pauline. I will turn it over to Yosha. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Avi, for the warm words of welcome and introduction. I'm wonderfully happy and feel blessed to see the outcome and the diversity of the outcome. So welcome very much, especially students and non-students from the US as well as from international. I see friends from Germany and from France, which is wonderful. I see a rabbi and a professor joined this, so welcome everyone very much. We are blessed today in this student and faculty colloquium with a bilingual poetry reading by the translator of the poet Mireille Gansel, together with Pauline. I will start introducing you properly and formally. Joan Seliger Sidney is the author of 3 books, namely Bereft and Blessed, Body of Diminishing Motion, Poems and a Memoir, and The Way the Past Comes Back. Plus, just in March this year, in 2021, her essay, I Married a Mathematician, appeared in the anthology Fast Funny Woman. Joan has received individual artist poetry fellowships from the Connecticut Commission on the Arts, Connecticut Commission on Culture and Tourism, Craig H. Nielsen Foundation, Christopher Reeve Paralysis Foundation, Vermont Studio Center, and is also a visiting faculty fellowship from Yale. She is, as most of you will know, a longtime friend and writer in residence at the University of Connecticut's Center of Judaic Studies and Contemporary Jewish Life. And in addition, she facilitates, I quote, Writing for Your Life, an adult writing workshop. Joan has brought with her my colleague, Pauline Valensi, who is a PhD student here at UConn. Her dissertation by the title Another Modernity, the Contre-Flaneur in 19th Century Paris, aims at removing the flaneur bias from the discourse on modernity and at dissociating mobility and flânerie. Her interests also include translation. Her translations of Perrin Langda's poetry have appeared in World Literature Today and New Poetry in Translation. She also translated his collection, A Few Microseconds on Earth, which was published by World Poetry Books in 2019. Welcome, Joan, and welcome, Pauline, very much. Last word from me, this presentation will last for some 35 to 40 minutes. And after that, we have room and time for your questions and comments. And with that, I'm happy to hand over the microphone to you two.
Thanks so much for your lovely introduction. I want to welcome so many friends, and even I see my cousin Howie from Florida. So it's just really exciting. So in a sense, it may be disappointing that we're not in person, but it's great that we are all together around the world. And several years ago, I translated a few poems by Jacques Alvarez Pereire, a French colleague at l'Université de Grenoble. but it really wasn't till fall 2019 when I got serious about wanting to translate. But I didn't have a poet to translate. And so my good friend Michel Ganem from France recommended her friend Mireille Gansel. And immediately Michel sent me two of Mireille's, her fourth and fifth published poetry books. And the one that I got most excited about translating is Maison d'Âme. And funny thing, Michelle was looking all over for her copy of the book, and I had to show her that her name was written in my copy because she sent it to me. It's wonderful to have a friend like Michelle for so many years. And as some of you know, UConn is really blessed to have Peter Constantine and Brian Sneeden directing. They created a translation, a series of 4 courses where students and faculty can get training in translation, working together in very populated classes. And it's, terrific to have their help. Certainly without it and without their recommending that Pauline help me, this project never would have gotten started. And when Michel connected me with Mireille, it was a coup de foudre. It was really love at first sight. And I began translating one poem after another. I followed Brian Sneeden's, his model of how he translated a Greek poet, just going day by day or week by week. And now this summer, I finished and started sending out the book, hoping to find a good publisher to do Mireille's poems justice. And Maison d'Âme, House of the Soul, is a collection of 53 prose poems meditating on hospitality, love for the stranger, beauty of the natural world, as well as on speech and language. And as a second-generation Holocaust survivor, Mireille's poetry bears witness to personal loss and beyond. She has absorbed tastes of language and purpose from Paul Celan, Nelly Sachs, Imre Kertész, Rainer Kunz, Tohu, and many other European, Israeli, and Vietnamese poets whom she's translated. And please excuse me if I mispronounce their names. At the same time that Mireille welcomes the stranger to her house of the soul, poetry is her weapon, an urgency with which to fight persecution and exile. In addition, her knowledge of the Old Testament also enhances her view of the world and her obligation to humanity, especially to refugees. Consequently, these poems are especially important for today's readers, as well as for future generations. Mireille's translation as transhumanist, brilliantly translated by Ross Schwartz, also inspired my work. In Lauren Elkin's foreword, she says that Mireille has carried over transhumance, the long, slow movement of the flocks to distant places in search of greenest pastures, to the transhumance roots of translation, the slow and patient crossing of countries, all borders eradicated, the movement of huge flocks of words through all the vernaculars of the umbrella language of poetry. She helps us understand translation is more than a grammar. It is a listening. We keep an ear out for what is unspoken, carried through language, smuggled inside of it. As Mireille worked with Nellie Sachs's poems, she understood that to translate could also mean to interpret. It is a task demanding extreme rigor and distance to enable each person to hear what is beyond the poem, what is written in the poem itself. 2 weeks ago, I attended a mini symposium with Eduardo Alfon on Zoom. He said translators have to get inside the text, that they can become architects of that edition to present it to new readers. I hope that's what I've been able to do with House of the Soul. Halfon also said memory is the clay of writers, that it's not linear, nor is Mireille's book as she revisits places and people across time. Lastly, Halfon spoke of the transmission of cellular memory. I think that's part of what brought me close to Mireille. Both of us second generation Holocaust survivors, communing with our lost families at the same time that we reach out to the stranger. And now it's Pauline's time, her turn to read in her beautiful French each poem.
Okay, so we will start with a poem entitled Habiter la beauté envers et contre tout. Habiter la beauté envers et contre tout, à la mémoire de Suzanne Buquier. C'est une histoire. Elle a commencé le 25 novembre 1927 avec une petite fille de 11 ans, Mai Fanoui, venue à New York avec son père depuis l'île de Victoria, au large de Vancouver, consulter un grand spécialiste. Et ce jour-là, elle a su qu'elle ne pourra jamais courir, sauter, grimper, juste et difficilement marcher. Et ce soir-là, pour la consoler, son père l'a emmenée à Carnegie Hall, le concerto pour violon de Beethoven. Et sur la scène, un petit garçon de 11 ans, Yehudi Menuhin. Bien des années plus tard, il lui dira « Je suis né 5 jours avant toi pour préparer le monde à ta venue. » L'histoire de leur amitié, nouée 45 ans plus tard sur cette même île de Victoria, et de la longue suite de portraits que Mai Fanoui Pavelic, fille de Yehudi, et son violon saisis sur le vif dans tant de lieux du monde, et où, par la magie de son pinceau, elle donne à entendre ses vibratos, ses accents à nul autre pareil. L'histoire de ce qu'il appelait leur langue personnelle. Ce portrait pour la Chambre des Lords, où l'on retrouve ce blason qu'ils élaborèrent ensemble, en exact respect des stricts codes et renfermant cependant les symboles essentiels de Yehudi Menuhin. 2 phénix, cordes et ouïes d'un violon, 2 mains soutenant le globe, Une charrue, symbole de la petite ville de Grenchen en Suisse, où Yehudi fut fait citoyen d'honneur. Le candélabre à 7 branches, en hébreu les mots de tradition hassidique, savoir, compréhension, sagesse, et foi, espérance, bonté. Et cet étonnant petit tableau qu'il gardait secrètement derrière son bureau. Yehudi lui avait dit un jour en souriant qu'il aimerait apparaître dans un portrait officiel comme un tzigane partant à la fête, assis à contresens sur son cheval. C'est cette image qui a inspiré à Mai Fanoui ce tableau rêve, tableau Chagall, qu'elle lui offrit pour ses 80 ans. Il représente, disait-il, tout ce qui est essentiel. La joie et la musique, le monde tzigane, la beauté profonde de l'horizon et la route de la vie toujours ouverte. We cannot let him go like this. Ce furent mes premiers mots à Mai Fanoui Pavelik, lorsqu'après la mort de Yehudi Menuhin, des amis canadiens me procurèrent son numéro de téléphone. La sonnerie retentit dans son atelier, tout là-bas sur l'île Victoria. Of course, darling, we have to do something. You are welcome anytime. Et c'est ainsi que je me suis mise en route, jusqu'à la péninsule de Saanich, au nord de Victoria, dans la vaste maison de Spencerwood, tout en bois, et dont les baies ouvraient de tous côtés sur l'océan. Et son jardin illuminé de fleurs, ombragé par ces arbres géants multicentenaires, près desquels l'on ressent l'immensité de ces terres. Sapins de Douglas et chênes blancs de l'Oregon, thuyas vertigineux et aulnes rouges. Là où Mai Fanoui avait son atelier et vivait avec son mari et leur fille, Tessa. Tandis qu'un soir, avec son photographe, nous choisissions ensemble les portraits qu'elle allait offrir pour le violon de la paix. En souriant, elle sortit d'un carton une reproduction d'un petit tableau, Dancing Trees. C'était le tableau préféré de Yehudi. Quand il l'a vu, il l'a pris, il l'a emporté dans sa chambre et l'a mis dans sa valise. Un paysage, une exception dans l'art de Mai Fanoui, peintre de la lumière qui habite les êtres. Petites gens du voisinage à côté de Rostropovitch, Glenn Gould, Katharine Hepburn, Ravi Shankar. Dans son atelier, tout un monde de regards. Autant de musique de l'âme. Comme si par la beauté, Mai Fanoui réparait chaque fois le désastre de son enfant au visage horriblement déformé par la maladie. Chacun des tableaux recelait une profonde histoire humaine, une rencontre rare chaque fois et de sa voix douce et comme retenue, une voix qui ne s'impose pas. Elle évoqua Pierre Trudeau, alors Premier ministre et dont elle devait faire le portrait officiel. Il avait fait le voyage jusqu'à Spencerwood. Une fois le portrait terminé, vint le jour de son départ. Il était déjà dans le vestibule, son manteau sur le bras, son bagage à la main. C'était une heure encore très matinale. Soudain, une porte s'ouvre, c'était ça. Pierre Trudeau lâche son sac de voyage et laisse tomber son manteau, va au-devant de l'enfant et sans un mot la serre dans ses bras.
To inhabit beauty against all odds in memory of Susan Buki. It's a story. It began November 25th, 1927, with a young girl of 11. Mai Fanoui came to New York with her father from Victoria Island off of Vancouver to consult a great specialist. And that day, she found out that she would never be able to run, to jump, to climb, but could only and with difficulty manage to walk. And that night, to console her, her father took her to Carnegie Hall, Beethoven's violin concerto, and on stage, a young boy of 11, Yehudi Menuhin. Many years later, he would tell her, I was born 5 days before you to prepare the world for your coming. The story of their friendship formed 45 years later on the same Vancouver Island, and of the long suite of portraits Mai Fanoui Pavelik made of Menuhin and his violin ceased from life in so many places in the world, and where by the magic of her brush she makes these vibratos heard, these accents unlike any other. The story of what is called their personal language. This portrait for the House of Lords, where we find this blazon they developed together in exact respect of the strict codes, and yet containing the essential symbols of Yehudi Menuhin, 2 phoenixes, strings and gills of a violin, 2 hands supporting the globe, a plow, symbol of the small city of Grenchen in Switzerland, which made Yehudi an honorary citizen. The 7-branched candelabra, in Hebrew, the traditional Hasidic words, knowledge, understanding, wisdom, and faith, hope, goodness. And this astonishing small painting that he secretly kept behind his desk. Yehudi told her one day, smiling, that he would love to appear in an official portrait, like a gypsy going to the party, sitting against the grain on his horse. It's this picture that inspired my Fanui, this dream painting, Chagall-like painting that she gave him for his 80th birthday. It represents, he said, all that is essential, joy and music, the gypsy world, the profound beauty of the horizon, and the road of life always open. We cannot let him go like this. Those were my first words to my Fanui Pavalik, when after Yehudi Menuhin died, his Canadian friends gave me her telephone number. The ringer rang in her studio over there on Victoria Island. Of course, darling, we have to do something. You are welcome anytime. And that is how I got started to the Saanich Peninsula north of Victoria, in the vast house of Spencer Wood, all in wood, and where the bay windows open on all sides onto the ocean, and her garden illuminated by flowers, sheltered by these giant trees, each several hundred years old, near which one feels the immensity of these lands. Douglas firs and white oaks from Oregon, dizzying cedar and red alders, where my Fanui has her studio and lives with her husband and their daughter, Tessa. While one evening with his photographer, together we were choosing portraits that she was going to donate for Le Violon de la Paix. With a smile, she took out of a cardboard box a reproduction of a small painting, Dancing Trees. It was Yehudi's favorite painting. When he saw it, he took it away to his room and put it in his suitcase, a landscape, an exception to me Fanui's art. Painter of the light which inhabits beings, ordinary neighborhood people next to Rostropovich, Glenn Gould, Katharine Hepburn, Ravi Shankar. In her studio, a whole world of faces, so much music of the soul, as if by beauty, my Fanui was repairing each time the disaster of her child, her face horribly deformed by illness. Each painting held a profound human story, an encounter rare each time, and in her voice, soft and reserved, a voice that does not intrude. She evoked Pierre Trudeau, then Prime Minister, of whom she was to make the official portrait. He made the trip to Spencer Wood. Once the portrait was finished, the day of his departure came. He was already in the hallway, his overcoat on his arm, his suitcase in hand. It was still very early. Suddenly, a door opens. It's Tessa. Pierre Trudeau lets go of his travel bag, lets his overcoat fall, goes up to the child, and without a word, hugs her tight.
Les portes des roulottes arrachées. Ce ciel de pleine lune au-dessus des étangs de Camargue. Maria raconte dans la langue manouche qui a les mots de tous les pays traversés. Elle raconte, elle était petite fille, c'était en Alsace, les camions allemands qui sont arrivés sur le campement, les hurlements des SS, les portes des roulottes arrachées, les femmes, les enfants poussés à coups de crosse. Son oncle a couru couper la corde qui attachait leur cheval. Il allait monter dans le camion quand le soldat allemand a voulu lui arracher son violon. Alors le vieil homme a levé son violon très haut et l'a brisé de toutes ses forces.
The doors of the nomads' caravans torn off. The sky of the full moon over the ponds of Camargue. Maria speaks in the Gypsy language, which has the words of all the countries crossed. She says she was a little girl in Alsace when the German trucks arrived at the encampment. The howls of the SS, the doors of the nomads' caravans turned off, the women, the children pushed by blows of sticks. Her uncle ran to cut the rope which held their horse. He was going up into the truck when the German soldier tried to tear away his violin. Then the old man lifted his violin very high and smashed it with all his strength.
Comme autant de petites maisons où apprendre à habiter le monde. C'était un soir de neige sur Silbertal. Réunis autour de la table, le comité d'histoire du village. Vous cherchez comment réaliser une exposition pour faire connaître, reconnaître Eugénie Goldstern, cette ethnologue du premier quart du XXe siècle qui arpenta vos vallées, déportée de Vienne, exterminée à Sobibor. Et votre question lancinante, mais comment parler de Sobibor? Dans cette nuit glaciale, cela s'imposa soudain. Transmettre la part de lumière et de vie. Son amour de la maison et à travers elle des habitants de vos vallées, et les plus reculés. Elle qui n'avait pas de maison, elle sauva la mémoire de vos maisons. Elle a noté, décrit, dessiné, photographié tout ce qui en faisait un abri, tout ce qui en faisait la beauté. Avec la même humble ferveur, elle collecta, cœur secret de vos maisons, les jouets, les premiers de la terre, taillés dans des branchettes, des os, des coques de fruits, dépositaires des rêves et des peurs des enfants, comme autant de petites maisons où apprendre à habiter le monde.
Like so many little houses where one learns to inhabit the world, it was a snowy night at Silbertal. Gathered around the table, the committee of the history of the village. You search how to set up an exposition to introduce, to recognize Eugénie Goldstern, this ethnographer of the first quarter of the 20th century who paced up and down your valleys, deported from Vienne, exterminated at Sobibor, and your piercing question, but how to speak of Sobibor? In this glacial night, it imposes itself suddenly to transmit the part of light and of life, her love for the house, and through it the inhabitants of your valleys and the most remote. She who had no house, she saved the memory of your houses. She noted, described, sketched, photographed everything that made them a shelter, all that made their beauty. With the same humble fervor, she collected secret heart of your houses, the toys, the firsts of the earth, carved from twigs, bones, shells of fruit, repository of children's dreams and fears, like so many little houses where one learns to inhabit the world.
Les murs nus de la maison. Les salles grises de ce prestigieux lycée parisien et ce matin fatidique, l'épreuve d'un concours blanc, disserté sur la poésie 6 heures devant une feuille blanche. Après ce désastre, errer dans les rues de Paris et au bord du soir, comme un veilleur, ce vieux professeur et son offre d'un travail à prendre tout de suite, un remplacement dans une école là-bas en Sarre. Partir. La neige fut noire dans les rues, sur les toits, dans le ciel. Neige noire sur les corons. D'errance en errance, trouver un lieu, et il y eut ce havre de chaleur, cette petite maison de mineurs, dans le village de Dudweiler. Toute de plein pied, la chambre était glaciale, mais le cœur de la maison, c'était la grande table dans la cuisine, le soir, autour des épaisses crêpes de pommes de terre. Au milieu de ces montagnes couvertes de forêts que le jeune Goethe découvrit depuis Strasbourg, en même temps que les mines d'Alain et de Houy, et qu'il trouva désertes et tristes, il y eut ce refuge, la bibliothèque de l'université. Sur la porte d'entrée, un jour, l'annonce d'une soirée avec un poète. J'ignorais son nom, Pierre-Emmanuel. Je n'avais jamais rencontré de poète. J'empruntai le petit volume gris qui venait de paraître chez Seguer. Il lut et parla, et sa voix et ses mots venaient non pas d'un livre, mais d'une vie intense, d'une quête fervente. Et chaque mot était comme de prendre un risque et en répondre. Quand je suis repartie dans la nuit vers la petite maison de mineurs, il y avait des mots qui sonnaient plein ce soir-là. J'avais découvert l'hospitalité d'un poète, de la poésie, je veux dire d'une parole donnée, et que l'on ne reprend pas, et jusqu'à sa mort, il y eut l'humanité indéfectible de ce poète, sa porte ouverte pour écrire et s'engager quand les poètes de Hanoï furent sous les bombes cette nuit de Noël 1972. Sa porte ouverte lorsque je lui rapportai de RDA la détresse de Peter Huchel. Immédiatement, il appela Heinrich Böll pour chercher ensemble un havre pour ce poète et sa famille. Et quand en pleine nuit de toute urgence, il répondit présent pour redonner une parole de vie à cette jeune philosophe et poète paralysée depuis l'enfance et au bout du désespoir. Les poètes sont les murs nus de la maison, crépis de cris, de sel, de lèvres, de nuages, fondés sur l'infini des larmes et jetés à l'infini du ciel errant.
The bare walls of the house, the gray rooms of this prestigious Parisian high school, this faithful morning, the test of a mock competition discussing poetry for 6 hours in front of a sheet, a blank sheet. After this disaster, wander the streets of Paris, and at the edge of night, like a watchman, this old professor and his offer to immediately take a job as a substitute teacher in a school over there in Sarre. The snow was black in the streets, on the roofs of the sky, in the sky. Black snow on the miners' cottages, wandering to find a place. And there was this haven of warmth, this small house of miners in the village of Dudweiler, all on one level. The room was glacial, but the heart of the house was the large table in the kitchen in the evening around thick potato crepes. In the middle of these mountains covered with forests that the young Goethe discovered coming from Strasbourg. At the same time, he discovered the mines of alum and coal, which he found deserted and sad. There was this refuge, the university library. On the front door one day, the announcement of an evening with a poet I did not know, his name, Pierre Emmanuel. I had never met a poet. I borrowed a small gray volume just published by Seliger. He read and spoke, and his voice and words were coming not from a book, but from an intense life and fervent quest. And every word was like taking a risk and being answerable for them. When I left in the night for the small house of miners, there were words that sounded full of that evening. I discovered the hospitality of a poet, of poetry that is of a given word that we do not take back. And until his death, there was the indefectible humanity of this poet. His door opened to write and engage when the doors of Hanoi were bombed this Christmas night, 1972. His door opened when I brought back from the GDR the distress of Peter Huschel. Immediately he called Heinrich Boll to seek together a haven for this poet and his family. And when in the middle of the night, he urgently answered the call to give of life to this young philosopher and poet, paralyzed since childhood and at the end of despair. Poets are the bare walls of the house, plaster of screams, of salt, of lips, of clouds created on the infinity of tears and thrown to the infinity of the wandering sky.
Pierre de lumière. Oui, commencez par la beauté du monde envers et contre tout. Ainsi, de ce premier matin, au seuil d'un long périple, à la rencontre des survivants de la famille de Hongrie et leurs descendants, au bout de la nuit, vous m'avez ouvert votre porte. Ton regard et tes mains de peintre savent saisir les moindres instantanés dans les embrasures de la vie, et aux premières clartés de l'aube, tu nous as emmenés voir le lever du soleil sur Jérusalem, et chaque pierre était de lumière.
Stones of light. Yes, to start with the beauty of the world against all odds. Thus, of this first morning on the threshold of a long journey to meet the survivors of the Hungarian family and their descendants. At the end of the night, you opened your door to me. Your look and your skillful painter's hands, knowing to seize the smallest snapshots in the embrasures of life. In the first lights of dawn, you led us to see the sun rise over Jerusalem, and every stone was made of light.
Foreign Islands, début août. Dans le petit port de Sea Houses, En levant l'ancre, ce matin, les pêcheurs ont bien dit, ils sont partis. Hier, il ne restait que 2 sternes arctiques. Au bout du ciel de pluie, il y a des cumulus lumineux avec des lacs de cratères bleus translucides. Le bateau longe les falaises et leur silence déjà d'absence, et en une danse d'adieu tout autour du fanal, où par temps de brouillard on allumait des feux d'alarme, 2 paires d'ailes, si blanches, si fines, à peine le poids d'une grande lettre tournoie avant l'envol, plus au nord où se fortifier, puis jusqu'à l'Antarctique, où elles arriveront en novembre, et sur l'île déserte des terriers, les terriers des oiseaux sont vides sous le vent, tremblent les étendues de ciguës vert pâle et les chardons gris perle, et au milieu des herbes déjà noires, un macareux tout seul parmi de minuscules myosotis, et les reflets argentés des derniers silènes maritimes. Quelques petits s'entraînent sur les vagues, le ciel de plomb est si bas que l'eau a des couleurs de nuit. Mais soudain, une éclaircie trace un pont d'argent, et puis sur la tourbe humide, il y a cette senteur des hautes menthes drues, récemment arrachées pour quand les sternes arctiques vont revenir faire leur nid.
Farne Islands, early August. In the small port of sea houses, upon raising the anchor this morning, the fishermen said, "They are gone. Yesterday, there were only 2 Arctic terns left." At the edge of the rainy sky, there are bright cumulus clouds with translucent blue crater lakes. The boat runs alongside the cliffs, and there's silence already of absence. And in a farewell dance all around the lantern, when foggy weather we lit alarm fires, 2 pair of wings, so white, so thin, barely the weight of a large letter. They twirl before flight further north, where they can fortify themselves, then to Antarctica, where they will arrive in November. And on the desert island, the bird burrows are empty. The expanses of pale green hemlock and pearl green thistles tremble in the wind. And among the already black grass, a puffin all alone among the minuscule forget-me-nots and the silvery reflections of the last silines. A few little ones practice on the waves. The leaden sky is so low that the water has the colors of night. But suddenly a sunny spell traces a silver bridge, and then on the damp peat, there is the scent of tall mint recently pulled up for when the Arctic terns return to make their nests. Thank you all very much. And now it's your turn to ask us questions.
Thank you so very much. Please join me in a round of applause for both of you. I found that both of your voices made for a very rich duet. So both the English and French, and Pauline and Joan, but also Joan and Gansel, I imagine a lot of doublings and duets we have here from you. Thank you very much. The line, "Every word is taking a risk," still rings in my head, and I think I'll take that home later today. I will allow myself to ask 2 brief questions to you, and then hand over to everyone else. To Pauline, I became very curious about the formatting of the original. Could you describe us or even show us how does it look on the French page? Is it verses? Is it stanzas? Is it prose?
It is prose, and it is mostly, here, I can show this page. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
There is no punctuation.
Huh.
It's the case in almost every poem.
Wow. Okay, that even raised the respect in my eyes for reading it out loud so brilliantly.
We practiced.
All right. And one question to Joan, as the translator, I was wondering, especially in the first piece about, I mean, we found out that even the original is bilingual at times. It features English language, but even beyond English language, it features English names, English paintings, English music, English landscapes, or I mean, New York landscapes. So how do you work with what is not French in the original and to bring that into English and still mark it maybe as bilingual? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's interesting that after working on these poems for such a long time, and especially loving that first poem, which is heartbreaking at the same time that, it's wonderful. I thought if Pierre Trudeau had done nothing good but hug this child with a deformed face, that was enough, But, with your questions, I just translated the French and left those pieces of English and all the different names, some French, some German, some Israeli, the breadth of the poet is so stunning. She seems to have known so many major poets, and she wound up translating all the poems, Nellie Sachs's poems, plus the correspondence between Sachs and Celan. And then she went for, I think, 4 years. She lived in Vietnam to learn the language and to put together single poetry books plus an anthology. She is so committed to human beings around the world. She, just an inspiration, her poems and what she stands for, her life. So I hope, besides rambling, that I answered your question.
Thank you for both your answers. I will be happy to hand over the microphone to the audience. I think our crowd is small enough that you can simply unmute yourself or raise your hands and share your question, please. I see a question from Howard.
But you have to be unmuted.
I did. I just unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Pauline, I so much enjoyed your beautiful French.
Thank you.
Unlike the French I speak that I learned in high school and college, it always comes out of my mouth with a Brooklyn accent. So yours is genuine and beautiful. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And Stu and Joan, we're separated now by 1,500 miles, but I love seeing my favorite cousin right now, even if it's digital. And I hope in 2 years when I go to Cambridge and see my granddaughter graduate, maybe I can stop off and we can get together in person and hug and kiss and get together.
Sounds wonderful.
Good to see you.
Beautiful reading by both of you. Thank you.
Thanks. Great to see you.
Same here.
I'm going to have to
Yeah.
back up. But I wonder if I could say something. Michel, je dois partir, mais tu peux dire peut-être bonjour à ma part à Gilbert.
Écoute, vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Oui, j'ai un problème avec mon écran. Je n'arrive plus à avoir mon plein écran avec vous et les commandes. Et peut-être que Yoshap peut m'aider là, à retrouver le plein écran. Je ne comprends pas ce qui s'est passé. J'ai juste des vignettes comme ça.
Ah, alors si vous bougez la souris, il y a un petit bouton en haut à droite qui dit
Oui,
View ou Format, ou ça doit dire quelque chose.
mais non, j'ai plus rien. C'est très étonnant. Alors, je veux pas vous embêter là. Je vais réessayer autre chose en remettant l'idée de la réunion, peut-être pour revenir dans la réunion. Je ne sais pas.
Pascal, on te
I'm
voit.
sorry. Pardon?
We see you.
I see you, Joan. But I can't have the full on my full screen. I have only small pictures.
Those little boxes.
And sorry?
I see everybody in little boxes.
Well, okay, it's okay.
Except when you speak, when people speak, then there's a full screen.
Right.
Je dois dire au revoir pour le moment parce que j'ai rendez-vous. Mais tu peux dire peut-être bonjour à Gilbert à ma part? Didn't go, huh?
I don't know. Well.
À la prochaine.
Joan, hello Joan,
Hi Claude
et Pauline. C'était très très émouvant de vous entendre échanger français-anglais. Vos voix sont belles. That was great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for coming.
Very moving, very moving.
Merci.
Jeremy, please.
Hey, I have a question about the kind of the translation process for Joan. I mean, I don't know if this is too much of a generalization, but Joan, I think of you as a poet who loves structures, and you play with various, poetic forms, and then this poet is so. Structured to the point of no punctuation, just and I'm curious how, as a translator, you moved from your own poetic predilections to working with that kind of voice.
Well, it's a good question, and my intent really in choosing, and Mireille's poetry so different from mine in certain ways, I thought, it's about time I really studied someone like, Mireille's poems and see what I could learn. And in the beginning, the first book, Coming Lettres, it's short verses. It's much more, it's not a formalist type poetry, but, I, started the usual way, it was much more like my poems. And then when I moved to Maison Dame, and I've exchanged some emails with Mireille, and she pointed out to me, these are not verses, So then, I went into prose poems, and I'm still, she occasionally will put in commas and a little bit of punctuation. And, I still have to deal with is it better if, I put in some commas, but at the same time, I read so many French reviews of her book, her style, and she was applauded for the way she, just runs free. And one of, the faculty members in the translation program said that he's bothered by the fact that in several poems, she'll repeat the title as the last line. And he was saying, isn't that a cop-out? And again, the reviewers thought that it wasn't, a way of just hitting the reader over the head. Yeah. Anyway, that's worked out fine. But again, the job, when you're either writing your own poems or translating, you're never finished. I mean, I've gone over these poems so many times, and I keep coming back and wondering, what should I do? Leave it alone or, fiddle with it a little more. But again, I'm blessed by working with a poet whose work is so outstanding that each time, I have not been bored for a minute during these practically 2 years of working on it. What's your experience as a translator?
Me? Yeah. It is interesting, right? That's part of the interest of translation. You're right, to start to inhabit and to be in conversation with a different style. The person that I most recently spent the most time on, Israel Eliras, he also has a quite different voice than mine, an almost Zen-ish quality, and it was a lot of revising to get from my voice to something more like his voice. He also, by the way, never ends a poem with a punctuation mark. He has them in the middle, though. and he wrote both in French and Hebrew. And did some of his own translation into French. He spent a lot of time in France.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Rav Jeremy. Mireille, avez-vous une question?
Oui, vous m'entendez ou pas?
Oui.
Oh
Yeah.
oui.
Oui, excusez-moi, je parle en français et je ne veux pas être longue. Je pense que cette question de la ponctuation dans le texte de Mireille Gansel est vraiment très, très important, très fondamental. Et il y aurait tout un travail collectif à faire à l'intérieur de chaque texte que tu as fait, hein, Joan. Et c'est pas facile parce que le travail d'écriture est lié aussi à un déplacement dans l'espace et dans le temps à chaque moment. Aller vers la maison de l'autre, aller vers l'hospitalité, être accueilli et revenir se traduit aussi à tout moment dans la ponctuation de chacun des poèmes. Et globalement, on a effectivement ce travail qui démarre avec la question d'une petite fille. Tu l'as lu, je ne crois pas que tu l'aies lu, hein, ce texte, Pauline, le premier. Tu l'as lu? Non, tu ne l'as pas lu. Je veux dire, maintenant, tu n'as pas présenté ce texte. Qui commence par, en français, hein, elle était jolie, ta maison, quand tu étais petite. Hein,
On l'a pas lu aujourd'hui, celui-là.
Oui, oui, bien sûr, je comprends, hein, que je sais que tu l'as pas mis, mais c'est cette question-là, hein, qui va être constamment active en quelque sorte, présente pour le poète, mais aussi pour nous, et qui conduit ce passage de l'un à l'autre, des uns aux autres, dans l'espace, hein, que ce soit au Vietnam, que ce soit elle a été dans d'autres pays, chez les Maoris, mais elle n'en parle pas ici, que ce soit en Allemagne, que ce soit à la suite de Eugénie Goldstein, hein, il y a toujours cette question sur ta maison, hein, et quel sens donner à ta maison.
Oui.
Et c'est pour ça aussi que, enfin, je vais m'arrêter parce que il y aurait tout un colloque à faire sur la ponctuation, hein, entre nous, avec vous, chez vous. Il y a tout un travail à faire sur cette ponctuation qui, à l'intérieur même de chaque poème, nous déplace d'une voix à l'autre, d'une maison à l'autre, d'un lieu à l'autre, hein, et c'est là où l'espace et le temps sont toujours convoqués, hein, dans la ponctuation, et permet le dialogue dans cette marche, dans l'arrivée à une maison, hein, et le retour aussi. Voilà, excusez-moi d'avoir été long, je ne sais pas si Pauline, tu peux leur dire quelque chose, mais très rapide, hein, de ce que j'ai dit. Tu l'as compris, bien, j'espère, enfin, je te vois.
Oui, oui, je comprends que c'est une ponctuation qui a plus un rapport en fait avec différents espaces et
Oui, absolument.
c'est une ponctuation un peu peut-être voyage à la fois dans le temps et dans l'espace.
Oui, mais qui explique ce passage à l'intérieur de chaque poème. Et Joan, tu as dû retrouver cette réalité et cette difficulté aussi dans la traduction, hein, qui est liée justement à cette ponctuation, y compris à l'ordre du poème, la reprise en fin de poème du premier vers, par exemple, hein, ou de la première parole plutôt de chaque poème, par exemple, de ces beautés qui font le monde habitable. La phrase revient à la fin, encadre le poème, c'est à la fois un retour et puis un pas de plus. Hein? Et ça, c'est d'une subtilité très grande dans le travail de la poète et dans le travail nécessaire de la traductrice. Je pense que tu l'as vraiment ressenti, Joan. Excuse-moi d'avoir été longue.
Merci.
Si Pauline, tu peux dire 3 mots, mais je ne sais pas si ça intéresse vos collègues.
En anglais, oui.
En anglais.
So Michelle was talking about the way Mireille Gansel uses her punctuation, because some poems have punctuation, and Michelle was pointing out the fact that Mireille Gansel uses her punctuation more as a way of showing the passage between different times and different spaces, and all these spaces always related to what is home and where is home and what makes the home. And this is how this punctuation is used throughout her different poems.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Pauline, for translation. I would like to take one more question by Ralph Seliger before we wrap up, if that's okay with you.
Okay, thanks. Joan, I was just wondering, Joan and Pauline, actually, in terms of this question of punctuation and the lack of same, mostly the lack of same, I was just wondering if you ever had a problem with you know, the meaning could change with depending on how you group the words. And I was just wondering whether you ever came across that as a problem, where you actually had to puzzle over that.
Actually, no, I did not, though it certainly could become a problem, for some translators, whatever. I see, though, as I was reading, I stopped, and I think that what I probably need to do is to put spaces in some of the places to give that breath that the punctuation would have given. But at the same time, I need to be careful to keep the intensity of the poem and, to be, just fair, to Mireille and her poem. But it's a challenge. That's why translation is such a complicated project.
Bien entendu. Now, I just wanted to quickly just say hello to Michelle Nogamuz and cousin Howie. I would be remiss in not saying that.
Thank you.
It's really wonderful how Zoom brings us all together. But I still am, looking forward to, maybe in May or June, faire un saut, to France. Just we need this pandemic to be finished.
Yes, allow me to take that as a final word for today. And let me both thank you once more very, very much for taking us quite a bit outside of academic textuality, but all the more into the intricacies of letters and the love of letters and the love of poetic letters. It was wonderful to hear both your voices and those poetries. We will be back in November and December with 2 more sessions of this colloquium, and I will send out invitations shortly. Have a wonderful Wednesday afternoon, and be well.
Thanks so much.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Merci so much.
Au revoir et bonjour à Ralph, que j'ai pas salué.
Bonjour.
Salut Ralph.
Bonjour.
Bon,
À bientôt. À bientôt.